Okay, well, started this video because I wanted to show swapping me putting on the Hydramax hydraulic throwout bearing from American Powertrain on to my T56 Magnum that I have in my Dart. Now, I bought the kit a while back. I actually had a couple issues with it that were actually my fault. So I picked up and got another bearing from them because I toasted this one, and hopefully somebody might be able to learn from my mistakes. I end up not being able to show the swap because without having a lift, it's kind of hard to get a good camera angle and good video footage from underneath the car. I did the swap in a couple hours the other day and was trying to get the car put back together to take to a local show, so I didn't have time to try and show all of that. So I'm going to try and do my best with the old bearing and a few things I have here to kind of explain what troubles I went through. This is the Hydramax hydraulic throwout bearing from American Powertrain. It will come with a attached bleed line, just like you would see here, and has a little red fitting or cap on the side that you would attach from the master cylinder to this. This is kind of a little rigged up example of the collar that comes with the kit, with the T56s and I believe the T5s, the TKOs. They come with this collar. This would normally, the collar is very similar to this. Has two bolt holes where you can bolt it on to the front of the transmission, and then there's a tapped hole in the side of it to where this little peg would screw into. This little peg or stud is to keep this bearing lined up correctly, and it just kind of slides up and down when the bearing's working. The way the bearing works, this inner piece, I have the O-rings out of it so I can take it apart. This piece would slide onto the collar. Well, actually, you would have the whole kit. Whole thing slides on the collar, and then the center piece stays stationary, and then the bearing slides up and down as you actuate the clutch. Now, this bearing's pretty small, and when you look at it, you have a pretty good depth from the face of the bell housing to the fingers of the clutch. American Powertrain put out two really good videos of how to install the Hydramax kit. The only problem that kind of stinks with me is with the T56s and most of us that would have the 6 speeds. The front of the transmission's a little different than your complete flat front, older 4 speeds or some of the 5 speeds. They measured from when they put the bearing on the collar, they measured from the front of the bearing to the face of the transmission. The problem with that is their base plate is actually higher than the face of the transmission. So that's why they measured to the face of the transmission. On the T56, this collar, the top of this collar actually sits lower than the face of the transmission. It's only a couple tenths, I believe. It wasn't much, but it can be, in some cases, could be, half a shim or so, and can kind of throw off your measurements. So on the T56 Magnum that I have, I measured from the face of this bearing to the top of the collar. when I got my measurement, say it was however many shims, and these are the shims that come with the kit. Another thing that I found out, these shims are 100,000ths. In their directions, they talk about a 63 thousandths shim. Well, that shim is a flat shim. These are the curved shims. If you read down further, they say these are about 100 thousandths. I would get whatever measurement and calculations that they tell you to do. I actually would put them on to the collar and then throw my bearing on, and then I would re-measure from the face of this to the bottom. I would take that measurement, subtract it from the measurement that you got originally from the face, from the bell housing face to the clutch fingers. When you subtract both those numbers, you should be around 100 to 150 thousandths clearance is where you need to be. The biggest thing that kind of ruined my bearing was not having it properly bled, and that was due to my bearing not being put on the transmission correctly. So when you put this collar on the transmission and you have the stud sticking up, this collar can be oriented a couple different ways. You want to make sure that when you put this collar on the face of your transmission, that this bleed line is the highest point. So, it's the highest point north. This bleed line, and this is how I had it, I had it pointing, I think, down this direction because there was a hole or a place in the bell housing that the line seemed to come out the best. So I rotated it so both the lines, all my hydraulic lines, came in pretty easily. They had no restrictions and it was easy to route them. That's not the correct way to do it. You need to make sure that this is pointing up. I ended up having to buy a longer bleed line because the hole that this ended up going out of, I wanted to hang down further, so it was easier for me to bleed the clutch, or bleed the bearing and the master cylinder and the whole 9 yards. But then again, just make sure that this is oriented where it's the furthest north, your bleed line. That'll allow any air in the system is going to go to the highest point, and then you can bleed out the system. That is something new that I learned. I did not really think about that when I threw it all together the first time. Nice thing with American Powertrain's Hydramax throwout bearing is it is rebuildable and serviceable. So because I didn't get the lines, didn't get all the air out of the system, it was working improperly and ended up cupping a couple of my O-rings. They're not dry rotted, they're not, I don't think they're nicked. I think what happened is they end up getting cupped because my system wasn't working right. So the rebuild kit's nice. It comes with new fittings, all new O-rings for the whole thing. This just pops apart. You have an O-ring that sits here and here, and then there's one on the inside of this. This one doesn't seal anything. All this does is keep this stationary on the collar when you slide it on. That O-ring fits tight, and it doesn't allow this to move around or rattle or to do anything. It just fits on there and stays to allow this so the bearing can move up and down. I believe that's it. That was my biggest issue that I had. I took me a little bit to figure out why it was acting up and making a little bit of noise, and pretty much the result of that was this bearing with air in the line. When this would shove out, it wouldn't come back off the clutch fingers, and it kept rubbing on here, caused the bearing to heat up a little bit, and made a off a noise when you're pulling up somewhere. I have that fixed now. I have the system bled and it's working great. So if there's any other questions or anything you guys have that I could help answer, please comment below.